Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year to all of you. Thank you for the work that you do informing the public here in Georgia. Thank you for your commitment to journalism. And thank you for making a few moments here this morning to discuss some good news for Georgia. You all know that Hurricane Helene devastated Georgia agriculture. And in the days before the storm, during the storm, and in the days immediately afterwards, my team and I have been in close contact with growers, ranchers, farmers across Georgia who suffered extreme damage as a result of the storm. Fall crops that were destroyed in the field, pecan orchards that had taken 15 years to grow toward production, destroyed overnight, over 1 million acres of timberland that were damaged, chicken houses that were destroyed across the state. Remember that agriculture is Georgia's #1 industry, and rural Georgia depends upon agriculture as its lifeblood. If family farms in Georgia fail, then whole rural communities fail. The tax base there crumbles. Funding for infrastructure, for public education, for public safety is not available. That's why I have been laser focused on supporting Georgia agriculture's recovery since those late morning hours overnight when the storm first passed through Georgia. Within days of the storm striking our state, I led 34 colleagues, both parties, both chambers of Congress, urging congressional leadership to swiftly advance agricultural disaster assistance. I was immediately on the phone and repeatedly on the phone with senior White House officials, as well as senior congressional leadership, urging that we pass disaster assistance for Georgia farmers. And you'll recall I testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee just a few weeks ago, calling on my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, to put politics aside and pass disaster assistance before the end of the year. And the good news is we've done it. We passed a disaster relief package that includes $21 billion for agricultural disaster relief, as well as an additional $10 billion in economic assistance for farmers in Georgia and across the country. And just as I was in touch with farmers during and after the storm, I've been in touch with farmers as we've been through this legislative process, and of course, to share this good news and to make sure that they're aware that help is on the way. One final note, I just want to compare this with the abysmal performance of the Congress after Hurricane Michael, which similarly imposed devastating damage on Georgia agriculture. After Hurricane Michael, it took about 8 months for Congress to appropriate disaster assistance. And the commitment that I made to Georgia farmers who still bitterly remember that delay and how politics and partisan politics and incompetence delayed that funding. The commitment that I made to them was that I would not let that happen, that we would move quickly, that we would move competently, that we would move through anybody or anything in our way and bring Republicans and Democrats together to get this done by the end of the year. If after Hurricane Michael, it took Congress 8 months, this time it took less than 90 days for us to appropriate this agricultural disaster assistance. So happy to take any questions on this, and thank you so much for your interest in Georgia's #1 industry.
Thank you so much, Senator. Like the Senator said, we'll now open it up for any questions that you all have. Again, please feel free to use the raise hand function here on Zoom. You can also pop into the chat if you have a question for the Senator. I think I saw Archith with your hand up. Archith, do you have a question?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jake, and thanks, Senator Ossoff. Appreciate your time this morning. Good morning. Hello,
Archith.
Senator Ossoff. Thanks so much for that. Appreciate it, Jake. Quick question for you with the relief effort. So for Georgia farmers, what's the timeline of this? When do they see this? And for people in our rural communities, how and what are the process for them to receive some of these federal funds? What can you lay out that timeline in terms of relief efforts?
Yeah, great question, Archith, and thank you for the question. And I'll be pressing the U.S. Department of Agriculture to distribute these resources as swiftly as possible. There will be a discussion in the next few days about whether this will flow to Georgia in the form of a block grant or direct payments from USDA to impacted producers. But time remains of the essence. Again, after Hurricane Michael, it took Congress 8 months even just to get to this point. We've done this in less than 90 days because I understand that that delay after Hurricane Michael just compounded the damage to Georgia farmers. That incompetence after Hurricane Michael made the impact of the storm so much worse. So just as I pressed for speed in terms of congressional appropriations and Congress taking the necessary step we have to take, I'll press for speed in getting the money out the door to Georgia farmers who need it.
Perfect. Thank you, Archith, of course. We'll go over to Sophie now, GPB. Sophie?
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Hey, Sophie.
Excellent. Thank you for taking my question. So obviously the package has passed. I'm wondering, once this money comes to Georgia, is there any room to include farm workers in some of these calls for aid? So these are folks that actually work in the fields for the farmers, and they're long-term residents of the state, but they were equally as devastated by Hurricane Helene as many of these farmers in terms of their livelihood.
Yeah, Sophie, great question. And what I want to do is have my office provide you with a full rundown of all of the relevant USDA, Department of Labor, FEMA programs that are available to support workers who are impacted by natural disasters. Because remember that the entirety of the federal response to Hurricane Helene in Georgia is support for impacted workers, small businesses, local governments who incur cleanup and disaster response emergency management costs. So this agricultural disaster assistance to producers is what I have been most focused on for the last 90 days because it's what took so long after Hurricane Michael. And, you know, if these farms collapse, Sophie, then there's no employment at all on an ongoing basis. But there are resources available for workers, for small businesses, for local governments, and I'll have my office follow up with you to get you the most precise and accurate information about how they work.
Thank you.
Of course, thank you. We'll now go over to Molly with WABE.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for doing this. I just saw that Archith posted the same question in the chat. So I'm wondering about if you know about breakdown, how much money we can expect coming to Georgia, how many other states are getting Helene relief through this package?
It's going to be substantial, Molly. Ultimately, it will depend upon how many producers either file for and receive the direct support through the USDA ERP program, or if there's a block grant, what USDA awards to the state. But consider this, there were a small number of states who were overwhelmingly impacted by the hurricane. And while there are some other natural disasters that have occurred over the last couple of years that will create eligibility for other events in other places, you know, this is going to unlock very substantial disaster relief for Georgia agricultural producers. We won't know what that total amount is until it's distributed. But I can also have my office follow up with you about some of the most credible estimates that to date have been produced for damages occurred in Georgia that are eligible for this kind of assistance, so you can have a ballpark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. All right, we'll give it another minute if anyone else has any questions for Senator Ossoff on this or any subject. Senator, I just got a question in, and then I'll go back to Molly. Justin Gray at WSB TV was wondering if you could speak to passage last week as well of the Social Security Fairness Act for Georgia's educators and first responders.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. It's a substantial bipartisan achievement. It's increasing and strengthening retirement benefits for teachers, firefighters, and law enforcement personnel. And, you know, I understand that in the national headlines, Democrats and Republicans fighting each other and insulting each other all the time is what gets the most attention. But on this single night, we passed that legislation to strengthen retirement in a very meaningful way. We're talking about a very substantial increase in retirement benefits for impacted teachers, firefighters, first responders, law enforcement, bipartisan in the US Senate. That same night, we appropriated this disaster relief for hurricane victims, including Georgia agriculture, bipartisan in the US Senate. So when we work together, we can get big things done. Thank you, Justin. And Molly, over to you again.
Another bill, I'm wondering if you have any updates on the future of the Ocmulgee National Park efforts.
We made unprecedented progress in this Congress for the first time, moving the legislation to create Georgia's first ever national park through a key committee in the United States Senate. We still have some distance to go, but we're closer than we've ever been. And we will pick up in this new Congress where we left off, having already demonstrated that we can clear the bill through committee in the Senate. And Molly, that means also having gone through the process of refining the legislation to get it that far, that intensive consultation with the Department of the Interior and the Park Service, that refinement of the map, the rights, the governance structure. So we still have some distance to cover, but we've come a huge way in the last year and a half toward making this a reality. And I remain fully committed to successfully establishing Georgia's first national park.
Thank you so much, Molly. We're going to take two last questions here. First from Clint Thompson. How soon can we expect a farm bill that is more than a year past due?
Clint, too soon to tell. You follow this very closely. You know how dysfunctional the negotiations on the Agriculture Committee have been. So I couldn't, in good conscience, give you a precise estimate, except to say that I remain committed to getting it done. Of course, I'm not on the committee, but I'm going to look for opportunities to bring Republicans and Democrats together to pass a farm bill in the new year. I do want to just take the opportunity to highlight that in addition to the disaster assistance that we passed, as I mentioned earlier, we also passed $10 billion in economic assistance for producers who, even without the storm, have been in many cases acute economic distress. So that assistance is on the way now. But in terms of the farm bill, we got to get it done. I'm going to keep pushing to get it done.
Great, thank you so much. And then last question, we'll go back to Archith, who had a question on another similar bipartisan bill introduced. Archith?
With the one about the Georgia teachers, I know that was out this weekend.
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about Social Security fairness, right? Retirement benefits?
Yes.
Yes. Do you need any further comment, or do you want me to restate anything on that, Archith?
I'm sorry, I meant the one about we had two. We answered that one, the one about the strength protections for vulnerable children as well. I know that came out on Friday. There was an introducing of a bipartisan bill to strength protection for vulnerable children. Could you clarify or talk a little bit about that and where that stands?
Yeah, look, Senator Blackburn and I have been working closely together for the last several years to protect the most vulnerable children forgive me for a moment. Archit, the only thing that could pull me away is a text message from my wife. You have my full attention. Senator Blackburn and I have been working for many years to strengthen protections for foster children and the most vulnerable children in our society. She and I worked jointly on a long-term investigation focused on the abuse of children in foster care. We've produced and advanced bipartisan legislation aimed at protecting vulnerable children in the foster care context, as well as immigration detention, a range of other contexts. This new legislation that we're working on now is to provide resources to states if those states, as they should, require that interviews with children in those kinds of custodial or foster care arrangements are recorded. Because one of the things that has come through clearly in the course of doing these investigations is that those basic investigative best practices. I know it sounds like it should be very simple, but if you've got a child in the foster care system, for example, who's alleging some kind of abuse, in some places, sometimes that testimony, that complaint is not being recorded, which obviously makes the pursuit of justice and the establishment of the facts much more difficult. So I'll get you more information on it, Archith, after this press conference.
All right, thank you, Senator.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time this morning. Apologies that we have to wrap, but Sophie and Destin will follow up offline. Thank you all again so much. We wish you happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Senator, any final thoughts before we wrap up? And of course, we will get you all a full recording of this press conference once it's processed.
No, much love, everybody. I hope you get some peaceful downtime with family. Hope you're all in good health. Really appreciate the work you do, and my team and I will remain open and accessible to you in the new year. So take care.